I'm Colonel Jack Jacobs, Army veteran and Medal of Honor recipient. Welcome to the National Museum of American Jewish Military History, where we maintain the legacy of the Jews who have served in the American military. The museum traces its roots to 1896, when the Hebrew Union Veterans Association was created as a response to the old canard that Jews hadn't served in the Civil War. In fact, thousands served on both sides. This organization grew, combined with other Jewish veterans groups, and in 1928 was renamed the Jewish War Veterans of the USA. In 1958, JWV worked for a congressional charter for a shrine to honor Jewish contributions to the American military. This shrine eventually became the museum, now housed in this building, which opened in 1984 when Vice President George H.W. Bush came to affix the mezuzah to our doorpost. These are the stories of men and women who fought and sacrificed for their country, and of those still serving. The stories of Jewish immigrants becoming American, of Jewish brother against brother fighting in the Civil War, of American Jews setting forth to fight against those who sought the destruction of the entire Jewish people. The stories of Jews in the American military are the stories of America itself.
Asser Levy was a leader of the first Jewish community in what would become the United States. In New Amsterdam, Levy was told guard duty on the wall was the responsibility of every citizen. However, according to Governor Peter Stuyvesant, as a Jew, Levy was excluded from this responsibility. Stuyvesant's policy forced Jews to pay non-Jewish burghers to serve guard duty in their place. Levy and his fellow Jewish settler, Jacob Bar Simpson, successfully appealed to the Dutch West India Company to overturn Stuyvesant's policy and allow Jews to stand guard. Levy thus became the spiritual forefather to all Jewish Americans who would serve in the American military in the years to come. The Jewish population in America was still quite small by the time of the American Revolution. Still, there were several notable officers who served in the new nation's quest for independence. Francis Salvador of Charleston was the first identified Jew killed in the Revolutionary War. Sometimes referred to as the Southern Paul Revere, Salvador rode 30 miles giving the alarm that an attack was coming from British Allied Cherokee Indians. He was later wounded in battle and died at age 29. When war broke out against the British for a second time, American Jews were there. Uriah Levy first came to prominence in the War of 1812.
He eventually became a commodore. He would have been the highest-ranking Jewish officer of his day. Within the Navy, he's known as the man who led the effort to abolish flogging. Uriah Levy thought that destroyed morale. Outside of the Navy, Uriah Levy is best known as the man who rescued and restored Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. Thomas Jefferson died in a large amount of debt. Monticello had fallen into disrepair. The building itself was rotting. And in 1836, Uriah Levy bought the Monticello estate. And he and a nephew led the effort to restore it.
The Civil War pitted American brother against brother, and for American Jews, this was no different. Many of those in service were German immigrants, but north or south, they were assimilating to the American way of life and supported their side. An estimated 3,000 served in the Confederacy and 7,500 in the Union. Stories abound of Jews serving in all capacities, heroes and those just doing their parts.
American Jews served for the Confederate Army. Probably the best known Jewish military man in the South was Abraham Myers. Abraham Myers was born in South Carolina and had attended and graduated from West Point. He served in the Seminole Wars and in the Mexican-American Wars for the U.S. Army. When the Southern states seceded, he resigned from the U.S. Army and immediately joined the Confederate forces. He, like other Southern Jews, were people of their time and place. They were largely assimilated, and for him, when the time came, he was going to be with the Southern states where he was from.
On the other side of the war, Marcus Spiegel served in the 67th and 120th Ohio Volunteers.
He was promoted during his experience in the Civil War, ended up as a colonel. Marcus Spiegel wrote a pretty extraordinary set of letters to his wife that have since been published. And Marcus Spiegel also wrote about some important Jewish issues, including being in the South, in Norfolk, Virginia. He wrote about attending Rosh Hashanah services with the Southerners who they were at war with. Spiegel was part of the Red River Campaign in Louisiana, and when Confederate forces attacked the ship he was on, Spiegel was killed in 1864.
At least 4 Jewish Americans earned the Medal of Honor during the Civil War: Benjamin Levy, David Urbanski, Abraham Cohn, and Leopold Karpoulis.
Well, Leopold Karpoulis was a Czech immigrant that went down to Texas to live with his brother. And he got very upset with the way blacks were treated down there and joined one of the Massachusetts regiments. And during the Battle of Wilderness, the Confederates were pushing the Yankees back. He got up on a tree stump and started waving the flag. And the commander of the division came running up on his horse and yelled out, rally around the flagpole. And that apparently got the division together and they were able to repulse the Confederates. He was cited for that. The interesting thing about it was years later, he actually petitioned Congress. He had to petition Congress for his Medal of Honor, which he succeeded in getting.
Amongst the important developments during the Civil War was the appointment of the first 3 Jewish chaplains to serve in the American military.
There was a Pennsylvania regiment, and as a regiment, they were able to elect their chaplain. This is one of the more unusual regiments in that it had a Jewish commander. The majority of the soldiers were Jewish. And they had elected a young Jewish soldier who was a very well-educated young man to be their chaplain. And one day, a visitor came from the Young Men's Christian Association, virtually outraged at the fact that a Jew was the chaplain. The Army regulation at the time authorized chaplains of recognized Christian faiths and gentlemen who had been given also bona fides by their congregation to be chaplains. An official went to President Lincoln, told him the situation. It took a while, but President Lincoln conceded and saw to it that the regulation was changed so that it would allow chaplains from any recognized religion.
The U.S. entered World War I in 1917. An estimated 225,000 American Jews would serve in the war. They served in every service branch of the armed forces. American Jews became ready to sign on to fight Germany. According to the American Jewish Committee Office of War Records, 40 to 50,000 American Jews volunteered for service. With such a large number in service, an organization was needed to serve the religious needs of American Jewish soldiers and sailors. The Jewish Welfare Board formed to manage Jewish chaplains in the military, print prayer books for Jewish soldiers and sailors, and contribute to morale in any way they could. Many Jews in service were immigrants from Eastern Europe, like Elijah Weisbram, whose parade helmet is seen here. Weisbram was a Russian immigrant who was drafted prior to becoming a citizen. He was with the 307th Engineers of the 82nd All-American Division. He saw action at San Miguel. The brutal terms of military service in the Russian Empire had been a reason to escape. In America, almost all of these same immigrants registered for the draft without complaint, including Abraham Krotoshinsky, who helped rescue the famed Lost Battalion for which he received the Distinguished Service Cross. Many received their citizenship while serving in the military, like Philip Klampus, a Russian immigrant who served with the 313th Infantry in France and was naturalized while serving at Camp Greenleaf in Georgia. Women also joined the service during World War I. Jewish women served in several capacities, including Army nurses like Ethel Gladstone and Mina Barrow. There were also marinettes in the Marine Corps and Navy yeomanettes like Sally Shackman. Kate Karpeles was the daughter-in-law of Civil War Medal of Honor recipient Leopold Karpeles.
Kate Karpeles was a Johns Hopkins graduate medical student and doctor who became the first female contract doctor signed on by the United States Army. She served in Washington, D.C. in a hospital here till approximately 1920. Another Jewish lady who served was a woman by the name of Minnie Goldman, who came from Chicago. She was one of about 400 plus AT&T bilingual telephone operators, later given the name Hello Girls, who served in France. Unfortunately, the U.S. Army treated these ladies very poorly. They had to buy their own uniforms. And when the services were over, even though they had taken an oath, they were told they were contractors, and as such, the Army owed them nothing.
Four Medal of Honor recipients served during the First World War: Sidney Gumpertz, Benjamin Kaufman, William Sarlson, and William Shemin.
William is one of four World War I Jewish soldiers who received the Medal of Honor. In France, during World War I, 1918, he left the trenches on 3 separate occasions under very heavy machine gun and rifle fire to go out into no man's land and bring back wounded soldiers. As a result, William Shemin got the Distinguished Service Cross. He subsequently got a Purple Heart. His family, however, and friends thought that he deserved more than the Distinguished Service Cross. And they wrote up the William Shemin Jewish War Veterans Bill, and on the 2nd of June of 2015, William Shemin, at least his daughters, received the Medal of Honor.
On December 7th, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor ended American World War II neutrality. Within the American Jewish community, there was an even stronger desire to fight in Europe as Nazi policies toward Jews continued to worsen. Approximately 550,000 American Jews served in World War II.
Morris Gordon was a rabbi. He was born in Poland, in Russian-occupied Poland, came to the U.S., initially enlisted in the Army before taking a commission as a Jewish chaplain. He was, for a time, the only chaplain along the Burma Road. He served in the China-Burma-India Theater. The story behind the arc is Chaplain Gordon was traveling in a Jeep that's hit by a bomb. It instantly kills the driver of the Jeep, and it throws Chaplain Gordon into a river alongside the road that they're traveling on. Fortunately for Rabbi Gordon, there's a Chinese officer close enough to see what had happened. He rushes over. He pulls Rabbi Gordon out of the river, saves his life. Chaplain Gordon survives. Unfortunately, everything he uses for Jewish services in the field is destroyed. But while Chaplain Gordon is recovering from his wounds, he develops a relationship with this Chinese officer who had saved his life. And this Chinese officer ends up building him this ark out of teakwood, and Rabbi Gordon is able to use it to carry a Torah, conduct Jewish services in the China-Burma-India Theater for the rest of the war, and it becomes a prized possession in his home for the rest of his life until he passed away in 2005. Louis Ligdorz was flying over Germany April 22nd, 1944. He was shot down. He ends up imprisoned at Stalag Luft III. In this POW camp, he begins to keep a diary. This diary shows the German rations, the amount of food they got for a week, which had them above a starvation diet, but not much. You see, 3 ounces of meat is on the list. That's for a week. In World War II, if you had a religious identifier in your dog tag, it would have been H, a P, or a C. You were Hebrew, Protestant, or Catholic. Those were the 3 religions that were known to the military at the time. For those going to Europe and knowing what Nazi policies were towards Jews, whether you wanted that H on your dog tag was something that you would have to think about. One of the most frequent questions we get is what happened to these Jewish American soldiers that were prisoners of the Nazis? Were they made victims of the Holocaust? And most typically, they were not. The Jewish soldiers were often treated the same as other American soldiers. The most notable exception to that was a camp called Berga, where 350 American soldiers were sent, and about 20% of them were Jewish, so way higher than you would have gotten from any kind of random sampling. And those 350 Americans were made slave laborers right alongside European civilians. At the end of the war, the Germans took them on a death march, and a huge number of them were killed. And that's the one true Holocaust story as it applies to a group of Americans.
This camera here sort of gives us a lens into another aspect of Jews in the military. In particular, what we're looking at is a camera that was owned by Sergeant Karl Heinemann, a German immigrant who was able to escape Germany in 1938, along with many other German Jews who came to the United States before the war began. And because of the nature of the freedom that they were able to have here in the United States that they would have lost in Germany, elected to enlist in the United States military and give back to this country. Many of these other German Jews wound up at Camp Ritchie, became part of a famous group known as the Ritchie Boys because of their linguistic abilities. They became interpreters, they became intelligence officers, some of them behind the lines as spies, all of them in the desire to do in the Nazi Empire and give back to the United States for what they felt they had earned and deserved.
As Americans reached further into Europe, they discovered the horrors of Nazi concentration camps. There had been rumors of Nazi atrocities. American Jewish GIs played an important role. They reported to the world what they saw. They were often Yiddish speakers, the only ones who could communicate with survivors.
Everybody was clad in these pajamas with black and gray stripes. So they were frightened, and I said, "Hat mich kein Angst." This is Yiddish Hund. And they still were afraid. And then Chaplain Boland said, "Ich bin..." This always gets me. "Ich bin an Amerikaner Rabbiner." I am an American rabbi. And it's as if all of the emotions had been unleashed.
There are 3 Jewish Medal of Honor recipients from the Second World War: Raymond Zusman, Isidor Jackman, and Ben L. Solomon.
Ben was a dentist. He was a graduate of the University of Southern California Dental School, who enlisted in the Army, received an infantry training, but when the Army found out that he was a dentist, they pulled him out of the infantry, gave him a commission, and sent him into the Pacific, where he wound up in Saipan at the beginning of the largest land battle in the Pacific. He was in charge of a aid station right in the front lines, basically. He was made battalion medical officer, but he stayed where he was, and the Japanese then overran the American lines. They broke into his aid station there and began bayoneting and shooting the wounded soldiers in there. He himself then grabbed the rifle and started to defend them to the best that he could. He ran out front of the tent and found a machine gun emplacement where the Americans manning that had been killed. He took over the machine gun, When the Americans came back the following day after they were able to push the Japanese back, they found him dead, slumped over the machine gun, and approximately 90 Japanese bodies sort of piled up in front of it. And he was immediately put in for the Medal of Honor, but it was turned down because Benjamin Solomon was a medical officer, and according to the Geneva Conventions, medical officers are not supposed to be involved in offensive operations. The argument, however, was made that he was not involved in offensive operations, but he was involved in defensive operations.
The chapel is a place for contemplation or prayer. Named for Chaplain Joshua Goldberg, Joshua Louis Goldberg was born in 1896 in current-day Belarus. He was the first rabbi to be commissioned as a U.S. Navy chaplain in World War II, the first to reach the rank of Navy captain, and the first to retire after a full active-duty career. Goldberg had served as a private in the Russian Army in 1916 before coming to the U.S. Chaplain Martin Whites created this portable ark, guided by that biblical reference. After World War II, U.S. foreign policy came to be defined by opposition to communism and Cold War with the Soviet Union. Beginning in 1950, the undeclared Korean War brought many Americans to the country divided at its 38th parallel to combat the North Koreans and their Chinese and Soviet allies. Leonard Kravitz and Tiber Rubin received the Medal of Honor for actions in Korea. Rubin was the only Holocaust survivor and Medal of Honor recipient. The extended war in Vietnam saw millions of American soldiers sent to Southeast Asia. Though anti-war sentiment was high from the soldiers' perspective, they were there with a job to do and responsibilities to fulfill. Both volunteers and draftees fought with that purpose. Jewish Americans served as all other Americans did.
Paul Zondervan was a Marine serving with the 3rd Marine Division in Vietnam in 1967. He was stationed at Phu Bai, and they were holding Jewish high holiday services in Da Nang, so he made the trip down. At these services, they were handing out these camouflage kippot, yarmulkes. They were made from the same material that they made these camouflage tents from, and they created them specifically for these high holiday Jewish services. Jewish services were often a little taste of home, a little taste of the culture from home, and these services really were a way for the men to reconnect with themselves as something of a refuge from war.
Jack Jacobs and John Levitow earned the Medal of Honor in Vietnam.
John Levitow was a young airman first class. He was a crew chief on a gunship, an AC-47 gunship, that one night was circling over a Special Forces camp in the northern part of South Vietnam. At one particular point of the flight, a mortar shell hit the airplane and blew a hole in the fuselage. John was riddled with shrapnel in his back, 40-some-odd wounds, bleeding, and the loadmaster, who was the one that would throw out the flares, had a flare in his arms and had armed it and was getting ready to throw it out when the mortar shell hit and dropped it on the floor. Levitow, sliding in his own blood, made several attempts to get it. He finally was able to grab a hold of it and threw it out of the airplane just as it ignited, saving both the airplane and the crew. And for these activities, of course, he was awarded the Medal of Honor.
Americans were brought to the Middle East to fight for the Gulf War in 1991. Among the Jewish Americans sent there was Rabbi Bonnie Koppel, the first female Jewish chaplain to serve in the U.S. military. The conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan that arose after September 11, 2001, have brought more men and women into dangerous roles. At least 57 Jewish Americans have been killed in service.
It's important that we remember the contributions Jewish Americans have made to our country's defense. Regardless of stereotypes, the record of Jewish service is a proud one. Here at the National Museum of American Jewish Military History, we'll continue to tell the stories of my comrades who've served in the armed forces.